Welcome to the Wingman Show. My name is Drew Brown, and my wingman, my man, the number one guy I know, Dr. Paul Thompson. What's up, brother? Welcome to the Wingman Show, where we're floating like butterflies and stinging like bees. Rumble, you two badass jet pilots, rumble. Welcome to the Wingman Show. My name is Commander Drew Brown. My wingman, my friend, the guy who watches my six is my main man, Dr. Paul Thompson. How you doing today, Brother Paul?
Well, Commander Drew, it's good to see you. I hadn't seen you in the flesh for a while. Seen you on video, but I know you've been a long way away. You back home now?
I'm back home, finished my Virgin voyage, and we're ready to keep doing our show. And the name of this show is Who in the Hell Are the Wingmen Anyway? We've done our childhood, we've done our college years, we've done our Navy years, and now we're going to do some FedEx years when we actually became airline pilots. We busted our ass to reach this goal, and we finally did it. But we're going to start off with a quote. And the reason we start off with quotes on our show is because my dad, Drew Bundini Brown, who trained Muhammad Ali, is said to have come up with the second most famous quote in the world. And that's float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Rumble, young man, rumble. Well, I want to give you another quote that my dad said that I don't know if anybody ever heard, but it's a great one. And he said, "You wouldn't know Muhammad Ali if there was no Joe Frazier." Once again, you wouldn't know Muhammad Ali if there was no Joe Frazier. And he said that because those three fights that the champ fought with Frazier really showed how great Muhammad Ali was. And it really showed how great Joe Frazier was. But those were wars. And the one that he did lose, the first one, which I don't think he lost on points. But that first one, Joe Frazier went to the hospital for 6 weeks after that fight. And Ali pissed blood for 3 weeks after that fight. So they were real boxing matches. They were actual real boxing matches. And my quote from that is, "You wouldn't know Muhammad Ali if there was no Drew Bundini Brown." So let's start off our show. All right, Dr. Paul, you've worked your ass off. You've wanted to be a pilot. You are now a pilot. You're now finally, after that first year of training, you're starting to make some money. Tell me about being a black airline pilot in this amazing world of aviation. Tell me something about it, Paul.
Yeah, for me, it was an interesting transition. I had a few other friends who had done the same thing, but just maybe a year before at the most. And they're on probation, they're in different airlines. And you talked about that first year. One thing that was very unusual about FedEx, Federal Express at that time, was that when I came aboard, they didn't have probation. This is very unusual. Uh, you're required you get training pay until you got out of your first training assignment. Then you went right to the normal scale, as opposed to the starvation year that most people do. And that was very, very unusual. That was a very nice benefit of going with them there. And a lot of guys really, really appreciate that. Because I remember, just as an aside, the thing was getting hired, the first day of class, first day you showed up, I don't really remember too much. That was orientation. Our orientation lasted about 15 minutes. But what got me was that I couldn't really believe I was there. And I kept looking at my name tag. It was like a little piece of paper. Everybody had like a name. I didn't know anybody in the room at all. It just showed up. Everybody's looking around at everybody else. We can't believe we're here. I keep looking. Is that mine? Yeah, that's my name. I felt like that when I got my wings. Is that? Yeah, that's you. And I kept looking and looking, and they were saying different things. I remembered nothing. I knew nothing because they spoke as though you knew everything in the world. And, I was just this first day, so I was just saying, wow, this is a strange world. And the cargo world, I think, was stranger still. So we basically go from a situation I left the Navy, you knew quite a bit. Now I'm in a totally new situation. I don't know anything. I know where the restroom is. And that's about it, the first day. How about you? What was your impression when you got there the first day or first week?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that point about pay because, like you said, other airlines, they go through a whole year of not having any money. Once we finished our training, we went on scale. And so that was a big benefit. But also, I couldn't believe I was an airline pilot either. Now, remember, I wanted to fly for Delta because like I said, I knew nothing. And to me, Delta was the best airline. Little did I know that FedEx was the best airline in the world for pay, for the way they treated their pilots, for all the benefits that they had, retirement. FedEx was the best. And I was surrounded by a group of guys now that were ex-military pilots, and some were from the Air Force, some were from the National Guard, some were from the Navy. But we were very well qualified. They even had some civilian pilots there, but we were all well qualified pilots. Now, like you said, I knew absolutely nothing of this world. Nothing. I did know that you could get fired. And I just came from a situation in the United States Navy that even if you lost your wings, even if you did something where you couldn't fly anymore, you still got a check. And unlike you, I was married and I had to move my family to Memphis, Tennessee. This was a new experience. I had children, I have a wife, and I have a real freaking job. I finally reached my goal of being an airline pilot, and I worked my ass off. I really, really worked hard. And I've always found out that when you work hard, you get stuff. So, being an airline pilot, and once again, the only black one in my class, and that didn't really matter anymore because I do have to say this: FedEx hired the most black pilots of any airline in the world. But still, I was now an airline pilot making money, getting ready to fly cargo all over the world, Paul. It was an amazing, amazing experience. Tell me this. Now we started to travel, and, we started to travel within the United States. Tell me about that flying at night that we did in the beginning and doing layovers all over the country, being in different cities every night sometimes. How was that? How was that adjustment?
Yeah, for me, the adjustment was well worthwhile because I got to learn a lot more about the United States than I really knew by going to different places. Now, it's true, it's different to live in a place versus visiting, but I've been to parts of the country I would have never gone to otherwise. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought the schedule was a little bit difficult. Again, I was a young man at that time, but you talked about the pay. May not have been the smartest thing to do, but I was working like 3 months. And I bought a new car. That's not the smartest thing to do, but I did it. I did it easily. And when you're by yourself, you can do that. Now you got a wife and two children. I can't imagine that. At this point, I'm still growing up and I'm trying to manage myself. But I like going to different parts of the country. I thought the hours were a little bit difficult. For the first year, I was okay, but I kept doing it over and I was flying extra and making extra. That's how I got the car, because I was the lowest pay rate, but you flew extra, you could make a little bit more, and I flew all the time. After the first year, though, I realized at the ripe old age of 30, I need to dial it back a little bit because a year later I felt different. And if you don't monitor yourself, you can hurt yourself. Because we'd fly at night. Everything was at night. But the schedule was very simple. In fact, you could memorize it after about 2 or 3 months. It was always the same place, certain number of places. And while we were there over the decades, it expanded globally. And that came with the acquisition of other companies. So when you said, flew all over the world, initially I flew all over the world. I flew to Islip, Long Island, and Newark, New Jersey a lot, maybe Las Vegas. These are other weird places, and I call them weird places, but stopping in the middle of nowhere, Amarillo, Texas, on the way to Vegas or something like that. Who even lives there? Well, yeah, a lot of people live there, obviously, but just knowing that you can go to those places, and then eventually we ended up going all over the country. The biggest challenge was basically getting your rest. That is extremely important for all of us as we grow through life. And if you don't manage that right, you can be messed up. How did you adjust to the schedule changes? Did you find it different than being in the Navy?
Wow, it was a lot different. First of all, we reached our goal, and the only reason I wanted to be an airline pilot, Paul, is because they made a lot of money and they worked half the month. Well, that was true. You didn't work every day. You worked a couple of weeks of the month, But when you worked, you really did work, and you did what they called turnarounds. So you would get in late at night, you go fly your trip, you get into a city in the morning. Like if you went to Oakland, it'd be a 3.5 hour flight. You stay in Oakland all day, you get your rest in the morning. And remember, your circadian rhythm was opposite. You were flying at night and sleeping during the day. Now, you and I have become real health nuts because we want to live a long time. And we realized how important sleep was. So, what you said was extremely important. The way I dealt with that, and why I really didn't get jet lag, even when we started flying internationally, I listened to my body. I didn't look at the time so much. The only time I looked at the time is when we had to go to work. But other than that, I ate when I was hungry and I slept when I was tired. And that kind of helped me a little bit. But also, we were starting to make some money. Now, I'm going to say it, and you don't like to hear it, but we're both retired airline pilots and we both are millionaires. But there's a way that we got there. In the Navy, I learned a long time ago to put 10% of your pay away. And that's what I did all throughout my Navy career. Well, I did the same in FedEx. And, we grew up in New York, and I'll never forget when I started going to junior high school, I had to start taking the subway every day. And
Mhm.
in Manhattan, the subway, there were always these guys with this Wall Street Journal, and they folded it certain kind of way in like a trifold, and they were always looking at these little numbers. And I just was very intrigued. What the hell is that? Well, I quickly found out that's the stock market. Well, I studied the stock market. I tried to learn the stock market, and that's what I did with my pay. I invested wisely, and it paid out in the end. But traveling at night and all over the country, it was great. If you want to know the truth, I had the best job in the world, Paul. So let me ask you this. Now, when did you finally get married, and how was that adjustment with your airline schedule?
Yeah, yeah. I got married a few years later. I think I was working about 2.5 years. I got married, and that was different. Again, I was childless, so we kind of stayed with the same routine. We're both young, and we could do things. And we had children, and we started having children. Then that changed things dramatically. So for the first couple of years, it was going all over the place, and it was nice. But it was funny. I got married, my wife kinda got used to me. She was so excited, she seen me in my uniform, and I'm leaving, and she was going to work really a few hours later, but she would just be up there chipper looking at me at 1 AM or whatever it was. But that would wear off eventually. Eventually, she got tired and she'd say, "We can't be go quieter when you go. You're slamming cabinets and all kinds of stuff." So from being chipper and smiling, after like about 6 months or so, I got to get up in a few hours. Be quiet. So the luster of everything can wear off. How about you?
Well, that's in everything we do. It's always shiny in the beginning and they do get a little dull. Well, for me, in the airline business, for anybody out there, it's all about your seniority. The day you got hired, because if you work it, the day that you got hired, anybody who got hired after you won't ever make any more money than you. You have the ability to pick your schedule before they do. So that is the airline industry. Well, because I had 2 children and they were going to school, I actually did my scheduling based on their schooling. If they had basketball games or they did cheerleading, whatever they did, I based my scheduling on that. Now, also, in the beginning, you have to fly reserve, and that means you are on the clock. You don't have to do anything, but you have to have a bag packed and ready to go within an hour if they call. And sometimes they don't ever call, and you're getting paid actually for doing nothing. Or sometimes they call at the most inappropriate times. Well, I did not like sitting reserve at all, and I played the seniority game. So my main thing was to be with my kids. you know, I said this a lot though. My dad was a great father. My mother was the best mother. My dad was a great father, but some of the things he did, really hurt me. And that was when he said he would come see me and he didn't do it. That really bothered me. Well, I made sure I didn't ever do that to my kids. So I scheduled my work around my children's activities and schooling.
Yeah, I
All
see.
right, Paul, after you got married, now you're making some money. Tell me about your transition because we changed airplanes. You didn't have to, but you kept bidding up because the bigger the airplane, the more you got paid. The better your seat position, the more you got paid. And you know, airline pilots, they like to make money. So tell me about your transitions and tell me about how you got to finally be a captain.
Yeah, well, I started as a second officer, a flight engineer. Probably people don't even know what that is anymore because it doesn't exist except in the movies. I started off as a second officer in the back, managing systems on 727. Did that for a couple of years, and I was able to move to the right seat of the 727 to actually fly the airplane, manipulate the controls. Love that. Being the first officer in a three crew airplane, you do minimum stuff. That was great. Did that for 2 years. Then I went to the right seat of the DC-10, which was great. That was a wide body airplane, big airplane that flew international. That's when we just started to do a lot of international. I really liked that a lot. One of the benefits I got right there at that position was that I'm kind of an international person and I've got family all over, not all over the world, in different parts of the world. And I was able to visit some of them routinely, regularly, and got paid to do it. There was a period of time for about a couple of years. I was like newly married, but I spent as much time either at my mother's house in New York or my cousin's house in Brussels as I did in Memphis. And most of it was during the daytime. And I was paid a lot to do that. I thought that was a blessing. That was a true blessing for me.
Well, myself, I remember I told you it was all about seniority. And I went from being an engineer in the 727, and I did not go to the right seat of the 727 when the bid came because I wanted to stay senior. I waited, believe it or not, until I could be a second officer or an engineer in the DC 10. But that means my seniority was higher than most people because I did not choose to go to the right seat. From there, I went to the right seat of the DC 10, and both you and I can always say this. That was the greatest job at FedEx ever. And that's because, like you said, there are no more engineers now. So the engineer back then did everything. They got the coffee, they did the walk around, they inspected the plane, they did the paperwork, and the right seater, where we were, all we did was fly. We'd land, we'd take off, we'd fly, and we'd go to the hotel and have fun. And so that's what I did. And I stayed there a long time until I had to stop flying. But when I came back, I still did the seniority game. Now, I've been a captain, but it was an A6 intruder that I was a captain of. I did not need to be a captain. I needed good choices for flying, for
Mhm.
days off. And that's what I did. And I stayed in the right seat and I went all the way up to the 777 that you were a captain of. I was in the top 10% of the entire company flying the right seat of a 777, meaning I got to pick all my trips and I did it whenever I wanted to. So I really like the experience of having my control of my time. And that's what I did. And I loved it. And I was making good money. And like you said before, if you wanted to make some extra money, you flew some extra trips. So I liked that a lot. Didn't you?
Yeah, sure. Love it. Yeah, like you said, seniority dictates everything. Dictates your pay, your schedule, and like I say, you bypass, captain position and other positions just to have control of your life, and that's not unusual. A lot of people spend their entire career in a right seat senior and can make as much as a say a junior captain. You can do very, very well if you want to do that. I was pretty fortunate because I came on at the company when it was still relatively young. So I always had good seniority. You talk about being on reserve. Thankfully, I spent very little time on a reserve for decades. I think I might have spent altogether all positions because you typically go on reserve if you start, you activate and it's middle of the month, you didn't have time to bid. A couple weeks here and a couple weeks there and a couple weeks, and that's about it. Maybe 2 months total in a whole career. Some people spend years, on reserve, and that's not good. That wears on you. So I was very fortunate, but it goes to timing. Things you have no control over. You just do the best you can and see how it is when it's time to leave.
Well, talking about seniority, how about our friend Keith Miller? Because he's about to retire soon, and I guarantee you he's number one in the 777 in the right seat. I guarantee you that that was what he's shooting for, and that's what he'll get. And that means if you have 500 trips, you only have to pick one because that's the one you're going to get. And I loved it. You're talking about flying all over the world. I'll show a picture on YouTube right now as I'm speaking. When I and Keith Miller flew to Paris for a weekend. We took a 777 for a 4-day weekend to Paris. That's the kind of job that I had. And that's what I was shooting for from before I went into the Navy. I heard that you could have a life like that, and I did. Well, now that you've had a 30 something year career, you were getting close to retirement. Tell me about your approaching retirement and what happened when you finally retired.
Yeah, well, approaching retirement was the same as before. I didn't really think about it much. Maybe until maybe the last 6 months or so, I started to reflect back on things and I remember my final flight was with our friend Keith Miller. He bid it. He would bid like the final flight, I guess, with people he liked pretty much. He did one with our ultimate wingman, Albert Glenn, and he'd take pictures. He did one with me, and I had pictures taken actually. And I've got like a little scrapbook of pictures I took, with him, and he took of me on the last flight. It was kind of bittersweet. I left on good terms. I appreciated it and thought, okay, what's your next thing in life? And I wanted to do a little more writing. So at first I retired and like 2 weeks later, I went back to school. I went to Emory University and got a certification in writing, which was nice. It took me about 2.5 years to do it just because of COVID interrupted. But that occupied a lot of time and that was good because I do like writing and it gave me something to do. And then we traveled a bit, initially for the first couple of years. But my biggest adjustment, though, and I realized thought about recently, is after I retired, one thing I started to do, I didn't do it all. I didn't worry about the weather, and I didn't realize I thought about the weather. I would think about the weather all of the time. Layover, going jump seating to, from, going here, leaving here. What's it like? Look outside, drive, oh, it's raining, it's going crazy. This thunderstorms going through, and I'm projecting, okay, I got to go from here to Dubai, and it's nuclear warfare. One day I was doing something shortly after retiring, and there was like terrible weather going through, and I think I was just going to the supermarket, and I thought to myself, I'm not really too worried about it. If I was going to the airport, I'd be looking at the flash, at the lightning, and all that stuff. I'm only going 2 blocks, and I'm going to go home. And I'm going to watch the Knicks play on TV. And I remember I can actually relax a little bit.
Wow, that's amazing. My career was a little bit more jagged. I had to leave on a medical. I got diabetes. And back then, you could not take insulin and fly. So I was on long term disability. And during that time, my wonderful wife, Lori, and I separated and we actually got divorced. My children were in college and I was in a whole change of life theory kind of thing. And what I did was the very first, my very first cruise on the USS Nimitz, we did a workup. And my very first port of call was in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands. And I won't ever forget it because it was the prettiest place I've ever been to. Well, when I got divorced, believe it or not, I packed my shit and I went to the Virgin Islands to leave. And 3 days before I was to leave Memphis forever is when I met my current wife, Katrina Brown, who's a wonderful woman. And Lori, let me tell you, she was a great mother, a great wife. And right now we are back to being best friends. So that all worked out. But after 12 years, what I did was I had a speaking career. So I've been on national television a lot. I wrote a best-selling book called You Gotta Believe, and I used to speak to kids. I used to speak to junior high school, and college kids about education. Education plus hard work minus drugs equals success and the American dream. And I had an excellent career speaking, and hopefully, through God's help, we've changed a lot of lives. And the reason I did all that is because I had to look back on my life. Remember, I told you I finally grew up at 26 years old, but I had two kids, a wife, and I had no career. But I had that college degree. And I had that college degree because my dad gave me no choices about it. No choice about getting a college degree. And so when I got that, my choices for being whatever I wanted to be were wide open. If I didn't have that college degree, my choices would have been very limited. And if anything, I wouldn't have had enough money to go back to college with kids and a wife. So I went and started telling kids how to become successful. And that's where the 11 Facts in Life came up. And that's when I started speaking. I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of kids and on television, millions of people. So that's kind of where my kind of career went. After 12 years, I got myself back in condition, a medical, physical condition that I did not require insulin anymore. And that means I had the nerve to go back to flying after 12 years, Paul.
Yeah, kudos to you. I mean, you've overcome a lot, and people don't realize when you leave, flying like a lot of things is a perishable skill, and you left for over a decade and came back, and by that time you came back to a company that was totally different. Technology, modernization, everything changes, and the images you had when you left very different when you came back. So there's a lot you have to overcome. There's some people I know that they've gone for years, extended periods of time. I had a couple of things myself, but I was out for a couple of weeks, not a decade or more. That's tough to come back from. And then sometimes the training or retraining process was not forgiving at all. The
Well, I'll tell
military.
you something. I went from the security of long-term disability to now going back to a job.
Yeah.
But my prior Navy, my prior FedEx experience, me growing up, I realized that one thing that would get me to where I want was hard work. And that's why I really talk a lot about hard work. I worked my black ass off coming back. I studied, I did extra, I did everything I needed to do to come back. And I don't know if you know this, but on my check ride, I cried when I passed. I was so happy and proud of myself, and I thank God 100 times. It was one of the biggest days of my life when I came back and finally passed my check ride and I could go back to work again. That was a very big day in my life. And then not too long after that, I retired. And I think it's just incredible, Dr. Paul. Everybody out there, thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you for supporting us, watching us on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, listening to us on Apple Podcasts. As you can see behind us, we got two badass jets. Dr. Paul has his A7 Corsair, and I have my A6 Intruder. We have a website. That website is wingmenshow.com. That's WINGMEN show.com. And on that website, we have a couple of things. One thing that we have is a newsletter. And this week's newsletter is going to be finding help for a drug or an alcohol problem, how to find help for that. And I think that's really important. And also, we have a frequent flow line. That means you can ask Dr. Paul and I any question you want. Now, going back to that drug thing, uh, Paul, tell me what you think and tell me your feelings about drugs and alcohol.
Drugs and alcohol, I've never used either of them. I've had a couple of mixed drinks, but I don't get along with alcohol at all, so I just don't do them. Drugs, I think you should avoid them. I hear people make a lot of jokes about them over the years, but I don't know anything good that comes from them. Even had a family member that perished because of that. I don't know any good drug stories. So if you're into that stuff, I think you need to stop. If you can't stop, you need to get help. There's no upside to being doped up. None at all.
Well, my story's a little different. The very first drug I ever saw in my life was heroin, and that was in Harlem. And I was a very young man. Matter of fact, people who smoked weed were like sissies, and people who drank were bums. And so the very first drug I ever saw was heroin. So I kind of grew up in that drug culture. So my take on it is this: I believe that we're all here to be happy. Happiness is the key, and that's why we do mostly everything we do. Well, some people try to get happy, and including me, and they do it with substances. So what happens is, now that we've gotten older, we realize that it touches your dopamine and your serotonin, and in your brain, it speeds all that stuff up. So you are feel happy for a little while. In my drug speaking, I always said, feel good for a minute, but be miserable for a lifetime. Drugs and alcohol will take you down. And I said that there are 8 deadly sins. I guess the Bible says 7. Well, I added the 8, and the 8th was alcohol and drugs. Alcohol and drugs will kill you. And you can get happy not using alcohol and drugs. It just takes a little work. Didn't I tell you I cried when I passed that check ride for my 777 coming back? I was high as hell. You're talking about getting high, getting shot from 0 to 130 miles an hour in 2.3 seconds off the front of the aircraft carrier. Boom, I was overdosing. So I found ways of getting high, but I did not use drugs to do it. And I had my experiences, I had my practices, so I know what I'm talking about. And it is the worst road you can go down. But I'm not going to tell people out there not to get high. When I had my children, I was high. When I got married, I was high. When I got my wings, I was high. When now I have grandchildren, I'm super high. Getting high is not the problem. Using drugs and alcohol to achieve that is. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for watching and listening and supporting us. And anybody out there who can hear my voice, whatever you think is important, and whatever you think is beautiful, and most importantly, whatever makes you happy, may you have that today and forever. I pray for peace.
I pray for peace too, Commander Drew, and we appreciate all those who listen, like, and share our message. We appreciate it if you're watching on YouTube, if you give us a like, it helps the algorithm, it helps spread this message to people who may really need it. Thank you all.
Thank you once again, Dr. Paul Thompson, my friend. Thank you for your love, your time, and that's something that we won't ever get back. I want to thank all the listeners, too. Thank you so much for doing the show, Dr. Paul. We're jamming.
Well, thank you, Mr. Drew, for inviting me on. Always good to talk to you. And ladies and gentlemen, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast or any of the podcasts. If you're looking at YouTube, they say smash the like button. Don't smash it. Just press it gently and use as a link to all your friends. You can also look at us on our website, wingmenshow.com, WINGMEN show, SHOW.com, altogether, wingmenshow.com. And we hope to see you in the future. Thanks again, Mr. Drew.
Oh, you're welcome. And we're still floating like butterflies and stinging like bees. Rumble, you badass jet pilots, rumble. May there be peace on earth, and goodwill towards all men and women.